All right, so we are looking at long division today of polynomials, but before we get to the algebra, we're going to review how to just long divide with numbers. Okay, so this is going to take us back to elementary school here for a little bit. But this same process that we're going to go through here is what we're going to do when we add in the algebra, okay, with letters and numbers. So does anyone remember what we do when we long divide? What are we looking for at the first step? Yes.
How many times 8 goes into 2? If that doesn't work, how many times 8 goes into 23?
Correct. So we check this. How many times does 8 go into the first number? Does 8 go into 2? No. So then you move to the next double digits. How many times does 8 go into 23?
2.
Twice. So we put 2 up here. And then what do we do with that 2?
Times it by 8.
Yep, we take the 2 times the 8 out front and we write it directly underneath here. Now we subtract. Okay, we get 7. Okay, what do we do at this point? Do we do 8 into 7? No, we're always going to get a number here where that number won't go into that. What do we drop down?
5.
The next digit drops down. Okay, so now we're looking at how many times does 8 go into 75?
72.
9 times. Okay, so we put a 9 here. Now we repeat this whole process over again. We take 8 times 9. We get 72. We subtract again. We get 3. We drop down the next number. And we keep repeating this. How many times does 8 go into 31? 3 times. Okay, so we take 8 times 3. When we subtract, we get,
7.
drop down the next number. How many times does that go in there?
9.
Exactly 9 times. So we get 72. We subtract, we get 0. We drop down our next number. We get 0. How many times does 8 go into 0? 0 times. Okay, we take 0 times 8. We get 0. We drop down our last number. Okay, how many times does 8 go into 7? 0. Take 8 times 0. So what do we do with this 7?
Put a decimal point.
All we're going to do is write remainder 7 on the end. Okay, another way to write that is to write 293900 and then 7 eighths. 7 being the remainder, 8 being this number out front. Okay? Any questions on this process? Because we're going to now add in the algebra, something you've never seen before.
Would you accept 7/8?
Yes. We're good? All right, here we go. Ready or not? All right, so we are dividing these two things. So we need to put x plus 2 out front, and then underneath the bracket here, we've got x squared minus 6x minus 20. Now the process is going to stay the same, but the question that we ask at the beginning is going to be different. We're not going to say how many times does x go into x squared. Okay? It tends to be a little bit easier if we phrase it in the way of how do we get this first term to look like the first term here? What would we need to multiply by? We just multiply it by x and we would get x squared, right? Okay, so that's what we put up here. Now, what did we do on the previous slide with that number on top? You multiply it by the one out front and then put it underneath that. So we're going to take x and we're going to multiply it by x plus 2. what do we get?
X squared plus 2x.
X squared plus 2x. Okay, same process as before. But now what do we do with this? We subtract it, but we have to subtract the whole thing. So we have to make sure that we subtract the first and the second term. You distribute that minus sign. So if we subtract straight down, what do we get?
4x.
Negative 8x. How come? Yeah, this is minus 2x right here because we have to subtract both of these. So we have negative 6x minus 2x gives us negative 8x. Okay, and then we drop down the next term, right? Okay, so we got our minus 20 right here. And now the process starts over again. We ask the same initial question. How do we get, I'm going to use a different color, how do we get this first term to look like this first term? We multiply by negative 8. Okay, so we multiply by negative 8. We take this negative 8 and we multiply it by the front, which will give us what? Negative 8x minus 16. We're taking this negative 8 times this whole thing right here and just writing it down here in green. Now remember, we have to subtract everything that we just wrote down. So when we get our number here, what do we have?
Negative 16x. Negative 36.
Negative 4. Remember, we're subtracting, so this negative 16 turns positive. Then when we put negative 20 and positive 16 together, we've got negative 4. Is this our remainder?
No.
This is our remainder right here at this point. Okay, so we've got a remainder of negative 4, or you can write it as, instead of writing this, you can write negative 4 over x plus 2. Either one works. Okay, let's do another one. We've got z plus 3, and rewrite this whole thing. Okay, so we're always focusing on that first term in each one. How do we make them look alike? So we're focusing here. How do we make this? Oops, those should have been a z right there. It'd be kind of hard to make a z look like an x. All right, so look in here. How do we get this term to look like this term? What do we have to multiply it by? 3z cubed. Okay, so we've got 3z cubed. Okay, what do we do with that?
Times it by z plus 3.
Times it by the z plus 3 and write it underneath here. So now we've got 3z to the 4th plus 9z cubed. It really helps you make less mistakes if you write parentheses around there with the minus sign, to make sure you remind yourself to subtract both items. Okay, so what are we going to get here?
Negative 12z cubed.
Nope. Try again.
Negative 15 z3.
Yes. Okay. Negative 15z cubed. We drop down our next term. So now we have minus 9z squared here. I'm going to switch colors. You might want to as well on your iPads. Because now we're looking, how do we get this to look like this? Right here.
No, negative 15.
Yep, negative 15 z squared. And then we'll take that green number times the z plus 3 and put it right here. So now we've got negative 15z cubed minus 45z squared. From 15 times 3. Okay, we're subtracting everything there. So what are we going to get? Drop down our next number. We're going to repeat this again. Get a new color. We want to get this term to look like this term. Okay, so we've got 36z squared because we're multiplying it by z plus 3. And then what do we get here? 108. Okay, subtract everything there. We're almost done. What do we got on here?
105z.
Negative 105z, and we drop down that last one, minus 6. And we are trying to get this first one to look like this first one. Okay, minus 105. Take that times the beginning, negative 105z minus 315. Subtract the whole thing, and we'll get our remainder, which is what?
9.
309. Okay. Yes. You can do that to simplify that, but that wouldn't help us in dividing it. Good question. We're not going to factor out any GCFs. Questions on this? Anyone still need this page? All right, we're just doing one last one. All right. So this is written in fraction form, but it's still division. Okay. So the problem and the process has not changed. We're still going to put our 3x plus 1 out here. And we've got 3x to the 4th. Now, something to note while we're writing this down, this one is actually missing a term. Which term is it missing? The one on the end without any x on it at all. Anytime you're missing a term, for instance, maybe this was missing the x squared term, you have to put a 0 in its place or it's not going to line up and work out. Okay, so for instance, if this x squared was missing, we would need to put a 0x squared in as a placeholder because you need every single term listed. So we're going to keep this 0 here as a placeholder so that we have that to drop down. All right, so this is our last one together before homework. How do we get this to look like this? We multiply by x cubed. Okay, so if we take x cubed times both of these up front, 3x to the 4th plus x cubed. Subtract. Nope.
Negative 6.
Negative 6x cubed. We just came off of Christmas break, right? That's the excuse. Okay, and then we drop down the next term. And we're going to start the process over. New color. How do we get this to look like this?
Negative 2x squared.
Okay, we'll take that negative 2x squared times both of these out front. Okay. What do we get when we subtract?
Three X squared.
And then drop down the next number and start over. How do we get this to look like that?
X.
We just multiply it by x, right? Okay, so we put our x up here. We take that x times 3x plus 1. Subtract that. What happens here? We get 6x, and then we drop down our last one, plus 0. And our last round of this. How do we get this to look like this? Times by 2. So we put our 2 here. We take that 2 times these two out front. 6x plus 2. What's our remainder? Negative 2. Or put remainder negative 2 is fine too. Questions?